There's a sound the mountains make when something's wrong. Not wind, not animals, not the slow rush of a creek after a dry summer. It's a silence, the kind where every living thing suddenly stops moving. Not because the night is peaceful, because something in the dark has given them a reason to. I heard that silence on November 3rd, 2019, 12 miles inside the Great Smoky Mountains backcountry, alone, my radio in one hand, a flickering flashlight in the other. And then, from somewhere in the tree line to my left, I heard someone whisper my name. Welcome to Trail Watch Tales, where park rangers share the encounters they were never supposed to talk about. These aren't campfire stories. These are the incidents that never make it into official reports. Before this story ends, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because what happened out there suggests that whatever lives in these mountains has been watching this region for a very, very long time.
Let me give you context before I give you the story, because context is everything when you're trying to understand how a 30-year veteran ends up standing in the dark, questioning everything he thought he knew about the natural world. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park is 522,000 acres, more than 9 million visitors per year, the most visited national park in the entire country. Most of those people come for the fall foliage, the black bear sightings, the waterfall trails. They hike the Appalachian Trail segment, take their photos, drive back to Gatlinburg for dinner. They don't see the park I know. The park I know starts past the 15-mile marker, past the last cell signal, past the last trail register, where the old-growth forest gets so dense the canopy blocks out the moon and the sounds change. The Smokies are ancient, among the oldest mountain ranges on Earth. The Cherokee called this land Shakonagay, land of the blue smoke, and their oral histories. I spent years talking to elders in the eastern band of Cherokee Indians about this. Their oral histories are full of things that lived in these mountains long before we did. Things that were never meant to share space with humans. Things that tolerated our presence the way you might tolerate a fly, until you don't. I've spent 30 years becoming the most experienced backcountry ranger in this district. I know every trail, every campsite, the seasonal patterns of the bear population, the elk reintroduction zones, the microclimates in the high hollows that create weather systems you can't predict. What I'm telling you tonight did not have a rational explanation. I want you to understand that I looked for one for years. There isn't one.
It started small. They always do. 3 weeks before the night I told you about, the night my name came out of the trees, I was doing a routine welfare check at Backcountry Campsite number 29 off the Goshen Prong Trail. It's a remote site, 4 miles off the nearest trailhead, near a fork in the Little River drainage. In 20 years of working that corridor, I'd never had anything unusual there. The permit holder was a solo backpacker named Webb, 34 years old, experienced. He'd filed his plan with dispatch. ETA return was October 11th. When he didn't check out by the 13th, I drew the assignment. The trail in was normal. Early October, the maples were turning, the air had that first real edge of cold. Perfect backcountry weather. I was almost enjoying the hike until I hit the half-mile mark from the campsite and noticed the birds were gone. Not fewer birds, no birds. No chickadees, no woodpeckers working the snags, no distant crows.
absolute avian silence in a corridor that's usually full of sound. I stopped, listened. The creek was still running, I could hear that. Wind through the canopy, but nothing alive. The smell hit me about 200 yards from camp. I've found deceased individuals in the backcountry before. This wasn't that. It was organic, deeply so, but with an undertone I can only describe as mineral, like iron and wet stone and something older, something that didn't belong to any decay process I recognized. Marcus Webb's campsite was intact. Tent standing, gear organized, his pack was inside the tent, sleeping bag laid out, but not slept in. His food canister was sitting 10 feet from the fire ring, properly stored. His journal was open on his sleeping pad. The last entry was dated October 10th, 11:47 p.m. It said, "It came back, bigger than last night. I don't think it's curious anymore." There was no Marcus Webb.
I called it in on the satellite communicator. No cell service out there. Requested a SAR team. Then I did what every ranger is trained to do. I began a systematic search of the immediate area, expanding outward from camp in 100-yard increments. On my third sweep, about 80 yards north of camp at the tree line edge, I found the footprints. Bipedal, deeply impressed into the soft earth near a seep, that wet, muddy soil that holds detail like plaster. Each print was roughly 20 inches in length. The stride pattern was long, over 6 feet between prints, and around the outer edges of each print, the grass was pressed down, not in the direction of travel, outward, like something of enormous weight had been distributing pressure across a wider surface than just the foot. I photographed everything, took casts where I could, and then I stood there in that silent forest for a long moment, doing the math in my head. Whatever made those prints outweighed any bear I had ever encountered, significantly. Marcus Webb was never found. His case is still open. I've checked every 6 months for 5 years. It's in the system as a missing persons, presumed lost, possible drowning in the Little River drainage. No body was ever recovered. His photographs, he was a serious photographer, had a good camera, were recovered when we sent someone back for his gear. Most of them were landscape shots, beautiful stuff actually, until the last 14 images on the memory card. The first of the 14 was taken at dusk. It showed the tree line north of his campsite. Nothing unusual, just forest. In the second image, taken 4 minutes later according to the EXIF data, something was different about that tree line. It took me a while to identify what. I've stared at that photograph for hours over the years. The trees were the same. The light was the same. But in the middle distance, between 2 large tulip poplars, there was a shape, tall and vertical, slightly darker than the surrounding shadows. By image 8, taken over the course of 40 minutes as the light failed completely, that shape was closer. Closer enough that its proportions were visible. Head and shoulders extending above a section of brush that I later measured at 7 feet in height. The last image was nearly black. The autoflash had triggered but been absorbed by something immediately in front of the lens, something large enough to fill the entire frame at close range. The camera was found 14 feet from his tent, not dropped, set down, placed deliberately on a flat rock, lens facing the forest. The SAR team found 3 other things during the 3-day search that the official report listed as inconclusive evidence of wildlife activity. I have different names for them. The first was a tree structure. 3 mature birches, each about 40 feet tall, bent and woven together at the top to form an arch roughly 12 feet off the ground.
The bending radius required to accomplish that can't be done by wind. Those trees were alive. Their root systems were intact. Something had bent living trees like wire. The second was a kill, or what remained of one. A large black bear, I estimated 280 pounds from what was left, had been dismembered. Not scavenged, dismembered. The limbs separated cleanly at the joints, arranged in a rough circle around a depression in the earth. The bear's skull was placed in the center, upright, facing east. The third was scratch marks on a beech tree. Vertical, parallel, deeply gouged, the kind of territorial marking you see from bears all the time. But these were at a height of 11 feet, and the spacing between marks was 8 inches. No bear makes marks like that. No bear reaches that height without the marks angling downward. These marks were horizontal, made by something standing upright, reaching up and dragging down. I brought all of this to my supervisor, District Ranger Patricia Suggs, 25 years in the service, smart as anyone I've ever worked with. She listened. She looked at my photographs. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Dale, write it up as wildlife activity. Mark the campsite closed for the season. Don't file the track casts." I asked her why. She said, "Because we have 9 million visitors a year, and if I let you file that report the way you want to file it, I will have to explain what made those prints, and I cannot explain what made those prints." She retired 8 months later. I never got another word out of her about the Smokies. November 3rd, 2019. I was running a solo patrol of the Appalachian Trail corridor between Tri-Corner Knob and Cosby Knob. High elevation, remote. The spine of the Smokies at 5,800 feet. The mission was trail maintenance assessment, post-storm debris logging. Routine. I do it 3 times a year. The weather was clear when I started. By early afternoon it had turned, a fast-moving cold front, the kind the Smokies generate without warning. Temperature dropped 18 degrees in 2 hours. The cloud ceiling descended below the ridge, and by 3 p.m. I was walking in dense cloud cover with 50-foot visibility. I found the first sign at mile marker 3 on the AT section north of Tri-Corner Knob Shelter. A tree had come down across the trail, not storm damage. The root ball was intact. The trunk had been pushed sideways, not broken, not fallen. Pushed, with enough force to fracture the root system of a mature red spruce. I noted it, logged it, kept walking. The second sign was subtler. My pace slows naturally when the visibility drops. You watch the trail more carefully. And because I was walking slowly, I noticed that the trail itself had changed. The mud, there's always mud on that section this time of year, showed prints. Overlapping, going in both directions, crossing my path at angles. The same proportions I had documented 3 years ago near the Webb campsite. I stopped. That's when the forest went silent. Not gradually, immediately. One moment there was the normal ambient noise of a Smoky Mountain afternoon, wind, the distant creak of trees, a raven somewhere overhead. And then nothing, not even wind, as if the entire soundscape had been switched off. My radio crackled once, static, then silence. I heard my name. Dale. Quiet, conversational, from the tree line to my left, maybe 30 feet. I want to be precise about this because I know how it sounds. It wasn't a call, it wasn't an echo, it was said at speaking volume, in the cadence of someone getting your attention. My name, clearly, in that dead silent forest.
I turned on my flashlight. It was dim in the cloud cover by then, and I directed it towards the tree line. I saw it for approximately 4 seconds, standing at the forest edge behind a spruce with a trunk maybe 2 feet in diameter, which it was using as partial concealment. Bipedal, tall, my best estimate is 8 to 9 feet, accounting for the crouch, because it was crouching. It was watching me, the way an intelligent creature watches, not the way an animal assesses a threat, the way a thinking thing considers a choice. I couldn't make out detail in the bad light and fog. What I saw was mass, enormous dark mass, and 2 points of reflected light at a height that should have been impossible. Eyes, catching my flashlight. And then, slowly, deliberately, with no urgency, it stepped back into the trees and was gone. Not crashing through brush, not running. It moved with complete silence into a forest that I know has dense understory and should have made noise. There was no sound. I stood on that trail for what might have been 3 minutes. My flashlight was shaking. I became aware at some point that my hand was shaking. 30 years. I had never in 30 years experienced fear on a trail the way I experienced it in those 3 minutes. Not in a lightning storm on a ridge. Not during a night SAR in rising water. Not once. I said out loud to the empty forest, "I'm going to leave now." And then I walked, not ran, because something in me understood that running was wrong. I walked south, back toward the Tri-Corner Knob shelter. I did not turn my light off. I did not use my radio until I had covered 2 miles. Nothing followed me. Or if it did, I never heard it. I retired in 2022. 30 years, 2 months, and 11 days of service. I did not tell anyone in the Park Service about what happened on the AT that November. I wrote my incident log for that patrol as observed possible wildlife sign, weather deteriorated, returned to trailhead, no maintenance assessment completed. I've written false incident logs 4 times in my career. Every time, it was for the same reason. I started researching the Cherokee oral traditions more seriously after 2019. I'd had conversations with Eastern Band elders before, professional courtesy, cultural sensitivity training, the usual. But after the AT encounter, I went back with different questions. An elder named Thomas Owl, who passed in 2021, told me something I've thought about every day since. He said the Nunahi, the spirit people of Cherokee tradition, the ones who live in the mountains, aren't what most people think. Most people hear spirit and think ghost, something thin and intangible. He said no. They are solid. They are present. They have been in these mountains since before the Cherokee came. They don't hurt people who are respectful, but they watch. They've always watched. And some of them, the old ones in the deep hollows, have grown impatient with the noise, with the numbers, with people who come into places that aren't meant for people and act like they own them. He said, "Your people call it wilderness.
My people call it their home. That's not a metaphor.
I asked him if what I'd seen was a Nunehi. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Something that speaks a man's name is something that knows the man. Something that knows you and still lets you leave is telling you something." I've turned that over in my mind 1,000 times. Marcus Webb's case is still open. There have been 14 other missing persons cases in the Great Smoky Mountains in the past 15 years where the evidence was inconclusive. 14. Some of them are experienced hikers. Some are day visitors who simply never reach their cars. Most are in the northern backcountry corridors, the same general zone as the Webb disappearance and the AT encounter. I still have the footprint casts in a box in my garage. I still have copies of Marcus Webb's photographs. I kept them when I shouldn't have, because I knew someday I was going to need them to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. I keep them because after 30 years in those mountains, I know what I know. We were never the apex predator in the Smokies. We were guests, and some of us wore out our welcome. If you're watching this from anywhere near the southern Appalachians, Tennessee, North Carolina, Georgia, Virginia, I want you to hear me clearly. The trails are beautiful. The mountains are worth every step. But when the birds go silent, when the forest stops, when the air gets cold in a way that doesn't match the temperature, don't wait to find out why. Leave the same way I did, quietly, without running, and don't look back. 30 years in the Smokies. I know what's in those trees, and it knows me too.